Imagine for a second two completely different professionals. On one hand, you've got a nurse on a bustling, super high-stakes intensive care ward, and on the other, a fighter pilot, literally strapped into the cockpit of a jet. One is meticulously preparing for care, right? The other is preparing for combat. They seem absolutely worlds apart. But what if I told you that the way the Royal Air Force prepares that pilot could actually revolutionize how the National Health Service prepares that nurse for leadership? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of analysis called From Framework to Formation. We're going to look at exactly what healthcare can learn from the military. And no, it's not about barking orders. It's about developing leaders for life. Okay, let's dive into this. Today we're going to map out a leader's progressive journey. We'll start with part 1, a blueprint for leadership. Then 2, the RAF comparison. 3, leading yourself first. 4, the missing middle. 5, strategic stewardship. And finally 6, from framework to formation. Let's get right into it. So section 1, a blueprint for leadership, defining what good looks like. For a whole generation, NHS leadership has gone through endless reviews, but the new NHS Leadership and Management Framework, well, it finally establishes a much-needed national standard for what good leadership actually looks like in healthcare. But, we really have to acknowledge a fundamental reality here. A framework is just a descriptive set of capabilities. Think of it as a blueprint. And as we all know, a blueprint is absolutely essential if you want to build a house. But a blueprint cannot, by itself, actually build the house. The greater challenge isn't just defining what a good leader is. It's establishing an active ecosystem that creates those capabilities in real, everyday people. And that's exactly where our core comparison comes into play. You see, while the NHS has done the really hard work of establishing a framework, a fantastic blueprint of standards and expectations, the Royal Air Force treats leadership as a continuous construction ecosystem. The RAF doesn't just ask what good leadership looks like. They ask how good leaders are systematically created. They're cultivating leaders progressively from the literal day they walk in the door right up to the day they retire. Which brings us to section 2, the RAF comparison, an unlikely match. Now, comparing the NHS and the RAF might raise a few eyebrows. I get it. But when you peel back the surface layers of these two massive, incredibly complex institutions, you start to see exactly why this comparison is an absolute game changer for the future of healthcare leadership. Now, what's really interesting here is the elephant in the room. The operational realities look fundamentally opposed, don't they? I mean, the NHS exists to improve health outcomes, while the RAF exists to defend the nation. The NHS relies on distributed authority across highly autonomous clinical professions, but the RAF operates on a strictly defined rank structure. One prepares for care, the other for combat. It seems like apples and oranges. But hold on, look at these remarkable similarities. Both of these organizations are operating in incredibly complex, high-pressure, and frankly, severely resource-constrained environments. In both worlds, the decisions made by leaders carry massive, life-altering consequences. Success in a hospital ward and success in an air mission, they both rely entirely on high-performing teams. Because the stakes are just so incredibly high, both organizations desperately need leaders who can manage huge risks under immense pressure. Ultimately, both recognize that leadership is simply too important to be left to chance. So, how do they actually build these leaders? Let's move into section 3, leading yourself first, the foundation stage. This is where individuals initially step into leadership roles. And honestly, it's where we see one of the most striking differences between the two approaches. Within the NHS, the traditional habit is to take an outstanding clinician and make them a manager. A brilliant nurse automatically becomes a ward manager. A top-tier consultant takes on divisional leadership. The promotion is essentially a reward for clinical excellence. But the RAF, they operate on a completely different principle: deliberate leadership cultivation. Their philosophy is that before individuals can effectively lead others, they must first learn to lead themselves. Self-awareness, resilience, ethical judgment, all of this is cultivated long before any real authority is handed over. I really want you to think about this for a second. What happens when leadership development follows an appointment rather than preceding it? In the NHS, we frequently see people being handed massive budgets, complex teams, and intense performance targets before they've received a single day of formal preparation for those specific responsibilities. It's entirely reactive. You get the job, you inevitably struggle, and then, well, maybe you get some training to help to cope. Now, let's see how this builds proactively in the RAF. They follow a crystal clear progression. Step 1, deliberate preparation. Step 2, formal assessment. And only then do we reach step 3, the actual assumption of responsibility. Throughout an officer's career, development is intentionally designed to prepare them for their future responsibilities, not just prop them up in their current ones. They're constantly asking, are you ready for the next level, before you ever even step foot in the room? And that brings us to section 4, the missing middle, transitioning to complexity. This is arguably the absolute toughest phase of leadership development in any organization, but especially in healthcare. It's that perilous transition where managers move from running small, localized teams to overseeing massive, complex, multi-departmental services. Now, despite the RAF having world-class formal education at the Defense Academy, they recognize a fundamental truth. Experience is the primary teacher. Leadership is ultimately learned through application. Formal courses, they give you the framework, sure, but true capability is forged in the fire of challenging experiences, supported by deep, intentional reflection. So imagine this for a moment. The NHS already has massive experiential opportunities, right? Service transformations, major incident responses, huge digital rollouts. But right now, they're mostly viewed just as operational tasks to get through. Imagine if every major program within the NHS was deliberately designed as a developmental stretch assignment for future leaders. What if deploying a new digital system wasn't just a stressful IT project, but a structured crucible for developing your absolute best next-generation executives? As the source material points out, leadership challenges change fundamentally as responsibility increases. Leading a small team of nurses is a completely different ballgame from leading a massive hospital department with competing professional groups and stretched budgets. The missing middle in the NHS desperately needs structured preparation. The RAF uses something called intermediate officer development to bridge this gap, ensuring that people don't just fall off a cliff when they get promoted into complexity. Now, let's transition right to the very top with Section 5, Strategic Stewardship, beyond operational management. We're moving way beyond day-to-day operations here and stepping into the high-stakes realm of executive board-level and system-level responsibilities. And this brilliantly illustrates how that evolution is a necessary step-by-step journey. You start by leading a small team. Step 2, a department. Step 3, you're leading an entire organization. And finally, step 4, influencing a national system. At this highest step, your technical expertise alone is completely insufficient. Your capabilities absolutely have to evolve from being just a great manager to being a broad steward of the entire system. At this level, strategic stewardship requires an entirely new toolkit. You have to understand complex systems, shape organizational culture, influence national policy, and lead through immense uncertainty and intense political scrutiny. Senior NHS executives today actually face identical pressures to RAF strategic leaders. They have to balance intense demands from regulators, the government, patients, and staff. And this requires a distinct, dedicated developmental discipline. Actually, scratch that. It's not just a more senior version of management. It's a completely different job altogether. Which brings us to our concluding section, Section 6, From Framework to Formation, the final takeaway. We've looked at the blueprint, the early stages, that tricky missing middle, and the strategic top. So, what is the ultimate takeaway the NHS can adopt from this military comparison? Well, here is the absolutely crucial point. Whenever we talk about the military, people immediately assume we mean top-down command and control, right? That would be a massive mistake for healthcare. Healthcare thrives on professional autonomy, psychological safety, and distributed expertise. The true lesson the RAF offers isn't about barking orders, it's exceptional intentionality. It's treating leadership development as critical organizational infrastructure, sharing the responsibility institutionally, rather than leaving individuals to just fend for themselves. The ultimate goal here is a total paradigm shift. We have to move away from leadership development as a reactive intervention, where we just throw a generic training course at a manager who's already struggling, and move towards leadership as a strategic workforce capability. This means creating a continuous, systemic pipeline across an entire career, where values, mentoring, education, and progression are seamlessly connected, the whole shebang. The introduction of the new NHS framework is, without a doubt, a monumental achievement. It finally gives clarity and consistency. But the true measure of its success really comes down to this one question. Will the new framework simply be adopted as a static document, or will it become the foundation for a genuine, continuous leadership system? If healthcare can make that leap from simply having a framework to actively forming leaders, it will create the pipeline required for the next generation of challenges. And that is a transformation totally worth fighting for. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep questioning exactly how we build the leaders of tomorrow.